Hey everyone, Kevin Norvell here with South Central Small Business Development Center. As you can see, we've got about 2 minutes before we're going to get started, but just wanted to come on, say hello, and let you know that we're going to be live. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post those, and we will try to respond to them if we can. But we're going to give folks here about another minute or so to get logged in, and then we'll be right back with you.
They're not as bad as I remember. They were terrible last time.
Passwords?
Yeah, they're still pretty bad.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get things started here. Welcome to all of you who are watching live with us. My name is Kevin Norvell. I'm the Center Director of the South Central Small Business Development Center located here in London, Kentucky. And today I'm here with my good buddy, Jonathan Patterson. Jonathan is a cybersecurity expert, and he's going to be leading us through a discussion on cybersecurity for small business. So just to kind of set the tone and set the context for what we're going to talk about, I wanted to share a little bit about why cybersecurity should be on your radar as a small business owner. You know, understand certainly you've got a lot on your plate right now with trying to run a business, trying to make it successful, trying to minimize expenses, maximize revenue, find new customers. So how do you have time to be worried about cybersecurity, and why should you be worried about cybersecurity? Well, the statistics are pretty haunting, in fact, so I wanted to share some of this with you just so you're aware of what we're dealing with. But basically, a recent study by Verizon found that 61% of cyber attacks in 2017, cyber attack victims rather, in 2017 were small businesses. 61%, which was up from 53% in 2016. A separate report found that 47% of small businesses suffered at least one cyber attack in the prior 12 months. While 52% of those firms actually experienced multiple attacks. So when you think about cyber attacks, you may think, hey, I'm not big enough. This is something that the big guys have to worry about. But small businesses often can be more vulnerable than some of the large companies. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring this to you today. The other thing you need to know is that when a small business does suffer a cyber attack, how expensive it can be. Some of the estimates that we see say that the range for cyber attacks and recovering from those cyber attacks, the cost anywhere between $84,000 and $148,000. That type of loss is extremely hard to overcome. In fact, there are very few business owners that I work with that could really, sustain that type of loss and continue operations. And that really is reflected by that next statistic, which is the one that's the most scary, meaning that 60% of businesses, small businesses, that suffer a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months of that cyber attack. So that's some of the reasons we wanted to bring this to you today. This is obviously a topic that is very detailed. And so what we're going to try and do today is just go over this with you at a very high level, provide some real practical tips, some advice on things you can implement in your business starting today that will make you more cyber secure. So October is actually National Cyber Secure Awareness Month. And so this is a great timely topic for us to address And so again, I welcome any comments or questions you may have. Feel free to type those, and we'll respond to those as best we can. Again, I'm Kevin Norvell from the South Central SBDC. Just so you know what SBDC does, we exist to provide technical assistance to people looking to start or grow a business. So everything from a person looking to get started and really doesn't know what to do first, to the person who's looking to grow or expand their business. So we offer a lot of technical assistance services in regards to business planning, market research, financial projections, those types of things. And so I encourage you to reach out to us if there's any small business assistance that we can provide to you. We basically serve 13 counties, from Adair County over in the west up to Madison County in the north and all the way down to Whitley County. It's sort of our footprint. But throughout the state of Kentucky, we actually have 12 centers. So no matter where you're at, you're never more than an hour away from an SBDC. So having said that, I want to introduce our speaker today, which is Jonathan Patterson. And I want to read you a little bit about Jonathan's bio because he's a pretty impressive guy. He's been a longtime friend of mine, and I really appreciate him being here today. But Jonathan is a two-time Army combat veteran who earned his combat medical badge in service to our country. Following active duty service, he remained with the Department of the Army. Certainly, it's an organization that is subject to a lot of cyber attacks. And Jonathan has received extensive training in IT security and has achieved recognition as both a certified ethical hacker and certified hacking forensic investigator. So after working with the Department of Defense for 10 plus years, Jonathan wanted to bring his expertise to small businesses. So he launched his own consulting firm called Kentucky CyberSecurity. And through this company, Jonathan conducts security assessments, recommends and implements remediations, and offers solutions for continuation of network monitoring. So Jonathan, thank you very much for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we're kind of going to get started. But is there anything you want to say to kind of open things up here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think this is a good opportunity to help small businesses. It's a good platform. As you kind of hit on earlier, there's a common misconception like, I'm a small business, who cares or who knows? And oftentimes you'll ask somebody, like, have I ever, hey, have you ever had a cybersecurity attack? And they'll go, oh, no, never. Yeah. But what people don't realize is that they're constantly scanning, and then daily you're actually getting attacked or getting scanned to see if you're vulnerable. So they are not looking at your business and saying, hey, I want to go attack this business. But, it's more like it just falls in their lap, a big juicy steak, and they want to, go ahead and attack it.
So it's not personal, is what you're saying. They're not trying to necessarily attack you because you are Kevin Norvell in London, Kentucky.
Exactly.
But it's more of I might be more vulnerable because I don't have something patched or I don't have the security that I need. And
you have a lot of resources that they can leverage. So you make them more effective, in what they want to do. So when you show up and they see it, it's something that they can take advantage of, So they don't want to attack the hard targets, right? They don't want to necessarily, there's people who do want to attack the Department of Defense and the Army, but there's a lot of people who are just trying to make money, so that it's an easy way for them to make money. So they don't want, as I learned, before, you don't want to get caught. And you don't want to get, in the military, you don't want to get shot, So they don't want either of those to happen to them. So they will attack the weak targets. So you have to present yourself as a hard target just to deter them from attacking you.
Interesting. All right. Well, folks, what we're going to cover here is just sort of walking you through some practical tips. Jonathan's kind of given us a list of what we want to cover today. So we're just kind of going to dive in, get started here. And so I'm just going to introduce the topic. So one of the first things that you can do as a small business owner is to protect yourself against viruses, spyware, and other malicious code. Jonathan, what does that look like? What's some things that people need to be aware of in regards to that?
That's just the simplest and straightforward way. You need to have antivirus on all your computers that connect to the internet. Unless it's like an air-gapped system that's not connected to the internet, you need to have an antivirus there. And I would even recommend like a centralized antivirus to where you get information. And so if one of your computers gets a virus, it sends it back so that you can check that console to see. And most of them kind of come like that anyways, right? You'll pay for one, and then you get so many licenses so you can see that at the console. And then this just kind of keeps, everybody honest too, because they know, it's not saying you're trying to catch the bad employees. You're just trying to keep the good employees honest, because they'll report to you if something happens, if they know that you can see it. So you can kind of take care of it on the front end, instead of something worse happening.
Mm-hmm. So, and just to clear up the misconception, because sometimes I'm a Mac user, and sometimes we feel like we're maybe immune to some of these security issues that our PC brethren have. Is that the case, or no longer the case, or what's your take on that?
It's not necessarily the case. Okay. What it is PC is a big target, right? Because PC is predominant. Everybody, a lot of people uses PCs and PCs in business, but as Mac and Linux are becoming more and more predominant, where they're becoming bigger and bigger targets. So they're going to expend effort to attack them, right? Whereas, PC had whatever it was, 80%, 90% of the market share. Mac and Linux keep growing and growing and growing. So they're also going to take effort to attack those. And plus there's the false sense of security. So most people won't have security on there.
That's a good point. Yeah. So we're going to make sure everything's protected as far as at the machine level. What about at the network level, securing our network?
Yes, definitely. Like one thing, that is talked about a lot is defense in depth. It's kind of like, think of an attacker as, he's just cruising in a car, driving down the neighborhood, and all these little houses are different, networks he can attack. So if he rolls up on a house and it's got, a fence with concertina wire, dogs, cameras, he's not going to do that. So you want those different layers, of defense. Aesthetically, it wouldn't be very pleasing to your house, but nobody can see the network, so it doesn't matter. So you want those layers. You want to just do little things, and it's not like it's just going to cost anything. It is just the stuff that you already have is your router. You want to make sure it's secured, with a good password. Use the highest encryption you can, probably a Web 2 or whatever, and then or not Web 2, WPA2, and then hide some of the they recommend hiding instead of broadcasting the SSID, and that's kind of something they call security by obscurity. If you can't see it, it's not really there. But so that's something that's recommended. That doesn't cost anything, right? It's just measures you can do so that it makes it more difficult for somebody to get in there. And then ideally you want a firewall. Now that is a measure that is going to cost something, right? It's just an appliance that you're going to have. And essentially what that is it's on the edge of your network. And if you're not calling somebody, if you're not talking to that, well, that firewall is going to block it, right? So, and that'll keep you from, as people scan, as I talked about earlier, that'll keep all that traffic from coming in. It'll stop it right at the front. So that's kind of like having, a security guard, asking people like, hey, did they, who do you know here? Who are you trying to talk to? No, I don't think they contacted you. You can't get in.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Very good stuff. So the next one on the list here is to establish security practices and policies in order to protect sensitive information. What does that look like?
Well, it's so easy to say, I don't know, anybody that has kids, would probably know this is like, I didn't know, So it's kind of, you take care of that in the front end, you establish these things and the repercussions for those, right? So you say, hey, these are the standards, that we have, protect sensitive data, protect personally identifiable information, such as names, social security numbers, all that stuff that you could be liable if you get compromised from your customers, right? So you need to clearly outline, don't do this, and they need to say, okay, I understand, or whatever. There needs to be some kind of back and forth there that's documented, so that if there is, ever something that happens, you can say, I did my due care, I did my due diligence, I was aware of this, I talked to them, it was, a failure to follow procedures that was established.
Are there certain industries, I think you and I have had part of this conversation before, there's certain industries like healthcare, for instance, or finance, where there's maybe some more guidelines that are probably more so than what you would recommend, but have been dictated by some governing authority higher up.
Yeah, and there's regulatory guidelines, especially with banks, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, and there's been some big. I wish I would have pulled the stats, but I didn't. There's more hospitals that is really getting audited because there's supposed to be certain technical HIPAA, procedures that are there, and there's been that's fined millions of dollars, and I think you can get fined maybe up to $25,000 per violation. So a lot of times they'll stack up a lot of violations. So it's just they're kind of I think the law was passed in 2010, so they're holding people more and more accountable, and they're auditing, and the people who have these violations, they're getting charged quite a bit of fines.
Yeah. So we've talked about, having obviously security on the devices, securing your network as well, and then having a policy or security policy in place. What about our employees? What do we need to do there in regards to cybersecurity?
You need to have some kind of training, and this could be a variety, right? And then a lot of small businesses aren't necessarily going to have somebody internal to do that. So it can be just as simple as finding an accredited or a good YouTube video from a trustworthy source. Having them watch that. Udemy is a good place. I actually watch a lot of videos from Udemy. I'm a big fan of Udemy. Or looking for a course that they can take, and then kind of requiring them to do that annually. Something that you can offer and say, hey, validate. That's why I said the YouTube. It's not going to cost you anything. Besides the labor of them watching the video for 20 minutes. But you're protected because they'll learn. Somewhat protected. Because your weakest link is always people. No matter what, your weakest security link will always be people. Yeah. So you got to start with them to train them up something. So you can kind of start there, and as time goes on, kind of build up. But you got to have a culture. Like the Department of Defense, they've created a culture over years of security. So you don't even think about it. You just it's part of the work culture. You're not going to open attachments on emails that you don't know the people are from. You're not going to be going to different sites that are not work related, and clicking on stuff because that's your work computer. That's not what you're there doing, because if that gets compromised, then that's your job. And there's clear consequences. That's part of it. So you get your network access revoked. You don't want to follow the rules. You can't use the network. You can't use the computer, period.
Yeah. So in terms of that, we kind of mentioned, you touched on part of it just as far as educating employees, but, and sometimes the employees being the weakest link. Passwords. I know I'm guilty of this, not having secure enough passwords or strong enough passwords, or or being the one that writes it down and leaves it underneath the desk calendar, at the workstation. But what can you do there? What type of advice do you need to give our employees so that they're establishing good password habits? There's often it's kind of a fun thing, the top 10 passwords. You can Google and look at some of the stuff. I was kind of disappointed earlier when I looked, because there was used to be some real good ones, but now it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 and 8, 6, 7, 5, 3, 9, different stuff. But you need to have some good passwords there, and it doesn't have to be super complicated. It's just the longer it is, so you can simply take a sentence, right? This is something that some people recommend to make it easier, is take a sentence, because it's going to be harder to crack that, and camel case it, which means kind of capitalize each letter to the first thing and string it all together. So that can make it a pretty complicated thing, and generally they want you to have letters, numbers, special characters, upper and lower. So you can do a number of those and changing out different letters. But a lot of people, and I know I've been guilty of this too, and the most embarrassing thing ever is when you got a call and be like, hey, the IT guy, I forgot my password. Can you reset it for me? So I understand completely. And then there's the two-factor authentication too, which is big now, and that's annoying as well. When you try to access your bank, or you try to access certain email, and then you got to get a text message, but it keeps it secure. So I know that it's annoying, but there's a reason. Talk a little bit more about two-factor, because I think that's something that still it's starting to catch on.
Yeah.
My office, actually, we're hosted through the University of Kentucky, and they've just now implemented two-factor authentication as an option for us. So it's handy. Yeah. But explain it to people so they understand, what does it mean and what's involved with two-factor.
Well, it's there's two things, so it's just not one factor as the password. A lot of times, for example, two-factor is something you have and something right? So, for example, they'll use CAT cards or common access cards or smart cards. They have a little chip in them. So you got to have that card, physically have that card, and then you have to know what the PIN number is to that card to access it. Right, so it's just any two factors. They can take a variety of factors, or such as having the password. It's like I said, something you have and something you know. So you know the password to log in, but then you have your cell phone, which you get a text message to, and then you have to put in that verification code. So there's two separate factors. So it keeps people from guessing. Hey, my mother's maiden name is this. Da 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 da. Let me reset. Well, they're not going to have your cell phone that's going to get that text message, so they can't get by that. Like, I think, what was it? I can't remember her name. She was running on the vice president ticket. They accessed her email.
You talking about Hillary's?
No, it was started with a P.
Oh, Sarah Palin?
Yeah, Palin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they accessed her like Hotmail or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they answered questions. She had the security questions.
Oh, man.
And they got on there, and it was like, something common that anybody could Google and find out. So then they got access to her email address.
And so that, I guess, comes into play, too, when we're talking about that, because people can obviously crack or hack into your password, or they can find it through, if they were specifically targeting you, like in her case, a high-value target, right? Somebody running for vice president. But they can find out information just from your social media profiles, right?
Oh, yeah.
They can gather things that you're, you see these quizzes. I know you've seen this. And when I see it, it just drove me crazy. Like, you've seen these quizzes on Facebook, and it says, all right, everybody answer, this will be fun. And it puts things in there like, what's your middle name? What year were you born? And it's like every one of those questions could be potentially used to reset your password.
Yeah.
Because there's some of those common security questions. So.
And then even like, the certified ethical hacker certification that I got, like it walks through the process that a hacker goes through to try to access a business, right? So one of the thing, and then this is specifically kind of targets, the small businesses, is if you go to the Department of State, you can pull, your LLC or whatever. So you can get all kinds of information about a business off that, right? Especially if you're looking at, some kind of social engineering or whatever, address, phone number, different things. So and you don't think about it because you got to do that, right, to start a business. But that information is publicly available on the internet.
Yeah. I know this is sort of related, but maybe not exactly. But can we talk a little bit about some of those different types of, potential hacks that people try to do, whether it's phishing scams? I know you mentioned, people know not to click on those links, but what are some of the differences there with regards to phishing? I've heard, more targeted attacks like spear phishing and whaling. Is that right? There's a whaling where they try to find somebody who's the CEO when he's out of the office, or he or she's out of the office. So what are some of those?
Some of those is phishing, and it's just kind of like, as it sounds. They spell it with a PH, but they're just kind of tossing the line out there, hoping they catch something. So just kind of generic. They send an email out, hoping somebody will click on it and get information. And there's spear phishing, which you actually look at something, an organization, and then you try to specifically do different things to get information, right? It's very it's more targeted.
Okay.
And then the whaling is so, for example, like you watch an organization, that the CFO or CEO or whoever important is gone, but you contact their secretary, and one is like, hey, contact the CFO secretary, hey, it's supposed to be da-da-da, his name, information. So it seems as though you're from the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can spout off all this information that you've pulled off the internet and accumulated. And then, hey, have you, wrote a check of this, or have you done this? So you get them to leverage because they're, oh no, I need to get this done for them, and they're out of the office and they didn't take care of this, and I got to take care of this for them. So it's very targeted to that person, and they just accumulate information. And then another thing is like you can look at Google Earth, right? They'll look at the smoking areas, right, around, and this is more, some kind of smaller, medium-sized business, where they go outside to smoke. They're not going to let you smoke in the building, right? But they have a smoking area outside, so they'll actually come and hang out with the smokers, and then talk to them and gain information about their business. Is just another way, and that's more social engineering, and then this would be for bigger businesses too, but they tailgate, so buildings that have controlled access, right? So say you got like a hit card or whatever, you got to swipe the card to get in. So they'll tailgate people. They'll kind of just follow behind them. So just like we were talking about, they were smoking. So they're talking. They've kind of got a rapport with them, and then they'll just follow them in the building.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to some best practices here. So we've covered now equipment, network, and employees. One of the things here is kind of interesting, credit cards, right? Employ best practices on credit cards and sort of payments. You mean so this would be like employee cards or cards that are just issued to the business that they're letting employees use? How do you mean what would that look like?
Well, it's just the usage of them, and then to the EMV chips, even the ones that they're receiving. So there's a big push for these chips, like you got the credit cards now or the debit cards, and they're coming. They got the little chip in them. So it's kind of like the thing we talked about earlier, something you have and something you know. So historically, something they would do. There's something it's called bots or zombies, right? They'll access a network. So you're kind of like, well, what would they do if I'm a business? What can they do to me? So they can gain access to your network, and then they can sit there. So they can leverage your computers as a zombie or a bot, right? And even your Internet of Things, right, is what they're calling now. So like your whatever, your
Alexa and Google
Sonos,
Home
all that stuff. Three of the top bots are actually Internet of Things. One of those is routers, right? So like the routers get access, they get compromised. So you can actually rent those, right? So you can leverage those. Think about that. And a lot of these people, it's not just average Joe. This is organized crime in states such as like North Korea, right? For example, it is known for attacking people, and they'll accumulate data. So think they accumulate data off your network for 6 months. So accumulate 6 months worth of credit card information, right? As people are inputting into the computer systems. We don't know anything. It's not said anything, but suddenly the people who've come to your business for the last 6 months, debit cards and credit card information is compromised.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so then that's kind of a big black eye. Just like Target. Everybody, you say Target now, what do you think of? Oh, I remember that time.
They got hacked,
yeah. So, and that's going to kill and close a lot of doors in small businesses because, you don't want to be associated with, well, they can't protect my information. They can't even protect my credit card, right? So, that's why you want the chip, so that protects it. But even though if you're putting it in there and you're putting in that CCV code or whatever it is, on the back, and you're putting that information into a computer system, and it's storing all that information so you can, charge them, routinely charge them to come in. Hey, is your information still the same? They can log all that and accumulate it. And then it's not like I said, they don't want to get caught. You don't want to get caught. You don't want to get shot. Yeah. So they accumulate that information. They sell it to somebody else. They sell it to somebody else. So, it's multiple points of contact. And by the time it gets to that end person that's going in the gas station, 5 states away, buying $500 worth of, whatever, I don't know, at the gas station. But they're never going to track it back to the person. And even if they do, the burden of proof to prosecute a cyber criminal is ridiculous. It's very difficult to prosecute a cyber criminal. Maybe a civil suit or something, you could possibly sue them, but to get them put in jail is extremely difficult.
So obviously with these best practices, a lot of that revolves around data, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the main things when you think about it from a small business, I think about all the data that small businesses have and how important that is. You've got your customer accounts, you've got customer records, you've got vendor accounts and records, you've got just historical documents related to the business that was created. So how do you take care of that? It's the next tip is to make those backup copies of important data and how you protect that. And
that's essentially, there's a misconception here too. Like you look at the assets of a business, right? And you'll say, well, that computer, that's a $500 asset. I paid $500 for it, right? Well, how much money does that computer make for you each day? If that computer, do you have something else if that computer dies, if that computer crashes, do you have something you can move over to, right? Some kind of redundancy in place there. And that's what happened with the WannaCry virus, right? So WannaCry, $4 billion worth of impact it had in the short time it was It was.
And was this the ransomware?
Yeah.
Okay.
Encrypted all of their files, right?
Yeah.
And it hit a lot of big businesses, and multiple small businesses, but encrypted them all, right? And said, hey, you got to pay us this many Bitcoin to get your data back. Couldn't access it. Totally couldn't access it. Right? So it was $300 to get it back within 3 days. Well, you can't do that. You got to get your money converted to Bitcoin. You got to get a Bitcoin account.
Yeah.
So you're not getting $300. Then it goes to $600. You think it goes through your whole network and gets all your computers. And say you have 10 computers, and out of those, or let's say you have 15 computers, you have 10 of those you have to have data off of. You got to get back. That's $6,000. That's a pretty hefty hit.
And that hit somewhere big. Was it in England? Did it hit
hit huge in England?
National Health Service,
Yeah,
I think.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically, at that point, this was really where, like you said, the data was encrypted, and so the only way to decrypt it was to pay the ransom.
Yeah.
And so they were holding hostage, your data.
Yeah.
And so how can you operate?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you got to have a plan, in place, like you were alluding to earlier, to back up your data. And it's so easy with the cloud now. Like a lot of times you'll have an offsite or an on-site storage. You can either do it through the cloud, and you need to make sure it meets the requirements, especially if HIPAA requirements, that it meets those requirements. Or if you're backing up your server and stuff, you want to have an on-site and off-site, and you want to have a schedule. Because even if you do have that in place, if your data that you got backed up is 6 months old, it's probably not going to help you that much.
Yeah.
It probably help you some, but you're not going to be doing business. And think even if the people bought that back, so let's say $6,000, and then it's taking you a week to get it unencrypted. That's not even counting probably getting somebody else externally to come in and help you with that. So the business impact is huge. And that's just something recent. That's been relatively recent to happen.
You talk about really ruining your day, your week, your month. It would be if you come in and find your data encrypted on Monday morning. Do you have a backup, number one, that you can go to? And I guess, too, Jonathan, have you tested it? Right? Because you got some folks who may be doing a backup, but they realize they're not backing up everything, or they're only backing up key components. And just the being able to test that, I think, is probably a good idea as well. At some point, make sure you're getting the data, but then test it to make sure you've got everything you need.
Yeah, continual business plans, continuity of business plans, or whatever. Those are something else, which is kind of separate. That's a little more in depth. But you look and say, hey, and there's a lot of things with that. If there's an earthquake, if there's a tornado, how can I continue to make money within my business? Will I have to close the doors? Can I go to another facility? Do I have the stuff available that I could just start working in another facility? What's going to happen? Am I just going to have to close my doors for 6 months until they rebuild the building? Wow. So that's another thing for small businesses that, continuity of business plan or whatever.
Yeah. No, good thought for sure. So one of the things on here, too, we talk about is controlling physical access. I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, talking about folks, how they get in the building, but just controlling physical access to computers and network components.
That one's just, you think about it, you can have the most secure computer in the world, but if you have it in the open to where anybody can go over there, it's much easier for them to gain access, right? There's tons of different things you can boot, and then I can bypass all kinds of security stuff, right? And then you can Google it and watch a YouTube video. Any Joe Schmo off the street can do that. If they can gain physical access to your equipment, they can gain access to your network and computers. So you always want to keep that in mind. With that being said, too, they don't necessarily need to see what's on your screens. So you need to have it hidden in a way that they can't. You can have a professional back and forth relationship with them, but they can't see information they don't need to see, and can't access equipment they don't need to access.
Yeah. Wow. Those are some very helpful and I think very practical tips for things you can start doing today, right? So this is not something that obviously in many cases you would even need a lot of help doing, but there may come those situations where the business owner just needs an outside resource. What are some ways they can really evaluate a consultant, for that type of work? Obviously, whether it's you or whether it's someone else, how do they know they're dealing with someone they can trust in regards to giving them good advice and helping them, deal with those issues?
I just look at the background, the person, their association, affiliation, recommendations, and then kind of what they're offering. For the most part, you want to get a baseline, of where you're at, and you're not going to go from, even larger businesses, you're not going to go from no security to, max penitentiary, overnight, so you got to have a plan, okay, here's my baseline, here's the worst case scenario. Even if you're right off the bat, you're going to put some stuff in. Here's my worst I was, kind of like a weight loss program or something, here's the worst, so then you can look at your steps and then have a continual, kind of like a risk management framework. It's a continual process of looking, and you should have probably several processes in your business that you're continually reassessing and looking and saying, okay, this is where we're at. Have we've done some things, we've put some precautions in place. We've dealt with these people. They do an annual assessment each year and look at us, and then each year they make recommendations, and then this company implements the recommendations or whatever it is, and then we go from there. How long ago did we do those? We implemented those 3 years ago, 5 years ago. So anything with technology, when you hit 3 to 5 years, you need to look at it and go, is this still good? Do I need to do something about this? If this breaks, what will this cost me? Is it okay? And is the cost of replacing it, at that 3 to 5 year thing, is it going to be worth, kind of risk, profit, whatever.
Risk versus reward of sort of return on investment there too in some ways. So.
Exactly.
So one of the I think misconceptions, or maybe one of the arguments I hear from folks who are not cyber secure aware, let's say, is number one is sort of what we've already addressed. They think, hey, this is for the big guys. Nobody's going to attack me. What do I have of value? You were telling me, when we talk about some of the largest breaches, Target comes to mind. Mm-hmm. But I think it was you, maybe another discussion, but I heard that one of the ways that Target was hacked was through one of their vendors who was a small business.
Yeah, that was Target.
So, yeah. And so the HVAC contractor was hacked and then was able to get into Target and hack them through a vendor relationship. So it's not just that you have to have your network controlled and secure. You have to understand and realize, too, well, are there partners that I'm working with or other companies that I'm partnering with that I need to be worried about?
And that liability is going to fall somewhere. So they're going to try to recoup, some money. So the same thing goes for the small business. They get compromised and become zombies. And then they use your computer systems to attack a large organization, right? Well, like I said, the burden of proof is through the roof to get the cyber criminal. So even if they can track them down, it's going to be hard. Yeah. But you know what? Your small business is right there. And they can recoup some of their losses from you a lot easier than they can this cyber criminal who's who knows where, right? Yeah. So that you got to do your due diligence and do care to make sure that you do what you can to keep from being that shield. That is basically an unknowing shield for them. Because nobody wants to take a huge loss in their business, no matter how big or small they are. So they're going to try to recoup it somewhere.
That's right. Another common thing I hear is that from folks who don't want to take the time, I think, really to, they've got a lot of burdens on their plate. They've got a lot of things, obviously, in the fire in terms of running their business. But many people, I think, feel like this is to quote them, it's another Y2K. They feel like there's all this attention being paid to something that they really don't see or understand. Yeah. And they feel like, if I spend money at this, what's it really going to? Yeah. But that's not the case. I mean, this is real. This is happening day in and day out. Oh, yeah. And so what advice, what do you tell folks who think that they're, this is not something that they even need to be worried about?
Well, that was kind of the Y2K, is something that they thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
But then you hit on it, this is something that happens all the time, happens every day, big and small. And it's not only, there's some big players in this, there's organized crime, that have people set up, and this is one of their revenue streams. They utilize this as a revenue stream. So, and then there's, some not super reputable, countries that have organizations that this is how that they make revenue for their country. Well, think about that, like the $4 billion we talked about with WannaCry that is associated with many countries have associated with North Korea. $4 billion is a lot of money. So all that was filtered through Bitcoin. It's anonymous. So what can we really do? Can we 100% say? It's hard. The burden of proof is heavy. So they don't really care who you are. They're just trying to generate a revenue stream for themselves.
Wow.
And it's not a good way to do it.
Yeah. What would you say, just from what you're seeing, obviously on a day in, day out basis, and obviously what you're following in the industry? What is the number one threat, or is there a number one threat? Is it just a combination of threats?
I think it's a combination. I think a lot of the Internet of Things is really getting us because nobody thinks about updating the firmware on their internet connected device. You think about
so
a
Internet of Things. Let's back that one up. Internet of Things. For those who aren't aware, most people have these. They just may not think of them in terms of Internet of Things. But it would be like your Alexa, your Google Home Mini, your smart refrigerator.
Anything that connects to the internet.
Anything that has a connection to the internet that you may not interact with, except you just may go plug it in and hook it up to the Wi-Fi.
Because it runs on an operating system, right? A lot of these run on OpenBSD and different Linux, versions of the Linux operating system. So it runs on an operating system, kind of like Windows, but a different version. And then so they are leveraging these because nobody thinks to update them. You think you've known it's the culture that you got to update your computer, so that. So these other Internet of Things are easy targets, and that's why those are the three. All three of the top botnets. Or zombies that I talked about are mainly Internet of Things.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So even with a router, you have a router that comes into your business, or home. How often do you update the firmware on it?
Yeah.
Most people never.
Right.
So that's, I think the third one is actually a conglomerate of a lot of routers that they have taken control of.
Man. Wow. Tell us, I know one of the things I wanted to ask at the start, we mentioned your certifications. So when you explain to someone that you are a certified ethical hacker, what does that mean? What was involved in achieving that, and what does that mean you're able to do that's different?
It's kind of like the best defense is a good offense or whatever.
Okay.
So you learn what they do, what the mindset, because it's the process, right? They look at it a lot of times as a business, so they go through the processes and say, hey, is this, is the benefit worth, the danger, whatever, right? So they go through these steps.
You're learning how the hacker approaches hacking.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's steps in the process. They learn the tools, everything they use. So like us, you can look and say, would we be vulnerable? You look at the information and say, this is what they're looking at as they're trying to gain access, right?
Yeah.
So do we show up as hey, easy target, or do we show up as a more difficult target? And there was training, and then a certification test, and multiple things that went in place to get that. But it's kind of more like it looks at it looks at the process that they go through, and then teaches you how to look at it through their eyes, right? So you know how to defend against it because you know what they're doing to try to compromise you.
Great. Well, this has been a tremendous amount of information. I hope this has been beneficial to our folks that have joined us. Jonathan, I appreciate you being willing to share your time with us and your expertise.
Oh.
I'm sure that people are going to need more information. So whether they're looking to hire someone to come in and advise them, or maybe they've suffered a breach of some sort and they need help figuring out how that happened and what they need to do to prevent that from happening in the future. What do they need to know about working with you and how they need to find you and that type of thing?
The easiest way to find me probably be through my website. You can actually schedule an assessment through there, or you can send me a message. I got my email address on there, or you can just send a question to me and I can get back with you. It's also got my contact information, but probably the best way to do it is to send an email so that we can schedule a time to talk, and then I can help them address any kind of security concerns they have, or any kind of compromises they've already had to keep that from happening in the future.
Super. Well, thank you very much again. Appreciate all of you joining us today, and those of you who are watching it on recorded version as well. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We can connect you with Jonathan and put you in touch with him, and if you need additional assistance. Jonathan, any closing remarks or anything you would like to let people know as far as if there's one thing they need to do today, what would it be? Or
one thing is just to be aware of it. be aware that this is not going away. This is because people only need, essentially a couple things. What do they need? They need a computer. Okay, everybody has a computer or some kind of device, and they need time. There's a lot of people that have plenty of time, and then they need a little motivation, right? So there's a lot of these people floating around, and security is always better to be baked in than it is to be slathered on after the fact. So as you're doing things, just kind of think, it doesn't necessarily have to be super expensive. That's the thing, is that people worry about too much of the cost. You just got to be security minded, so that way if something does happen, you can say, I've done all these things, kind of some of the stuff we talked about today, and then continue the process, say, hey, over the last 3 years, each year I've continually improved, so it helps limit your liability and showing that you are aware you're doing what you can as a small business, instead of just being like, I left my front door open. Essentially, it's equivalent of being like, I don't know why my store got robbed. I left the door unlocked,
That's right. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate the comments and thumbs up we received during the broadcast. Thank you all. If there's any additional questions you have, feel free to reach out to us, and stay tuned and check back with us as we continue to offer these types of webinars and web chats on a more frequent basis on topics that are relevant and important to the small business community. So with that, we thank you all very much. We'll see you next time.